I'd like to thank you for allowing us into your homes for this 26th edition of Season 3 of Esoteric Science Roundtable. And I would like to thank my guest Shag for coming down tonight to help me flesh out our topic for discussion, which is going to be pyramid energy. And we're going to get into some of the aspects of various aspects of the idea that the pyramid at some level or another is an energy generating device. Now, as to or for what purposes, to what ends, we're going to try to delve into that a little bit and try to explore that somewhat with the help of some books that you've been reading lately and just some of the information that we're going to try to just delve into from our own understanding of the topics. So, Shag, thanks for coming on. First of all,
Thanks a
appreciate
lot.
it.
Thanks for having me on.
Right on. And some folks obviously know you from different events, the metaphysical meetings and things of that nature. They might be
Yeah.
familiar with you. So
They know me for being banned. No, I'm just kidding.
you could bring that up if you want.
I'm not going to even talk about it.
Okay, but go ahead and get into, well, not necessarily the books, but start laying out, if you don't mind, your ideas as to the pyramids, and particularly the Great Pyramid at Giza, as some kind of an energy device or energy source.
Well, I think it'd be good if I introduced the books first so
Okay,
people
sure.
got an idea of what
Right
I'm
on.
going to be talking about.
Okay, sounds good.
The first book, there's two major books that I'm going to be dealing with. The first one is this. Can you go to this?
What do you got there?
Can you go? Okay, there we go. This is called The Giza Power Plant by Christopher Dunn. See?
And it's a blue book, obviously.
Right. It's a blue book, so obviously it doesn't show up that well. And the second book that I'm going to be dealing with for the most part is this book right here. And this is called Pyramid Energy, Philosophy of God, Science of Man. And this was actually a collaboration of sorts by 4 different people. So if you want to know the authors, I'll let you know. They're, let's see, Dean, Mary Hardy, Marjorie Killick, and Kenneth. And Kenneth is kind of like the psychic of the bunch. And the 2 other books that I just brought along with me that are kind of relevant is this one called Orgone Accumulator Handbook. I'm sure everybody's heard of this at one time or another. This is by James DeMayo. And the last book I'll just touch on is Serpent in the Sky by John Anthony West. And he deals with a lot of the numerology aspect and a lot of the mathematics and the symbolism of the Great Pyramids and this and that. So it's a good book. Well, all of these books are good. So, so basically, what I want to talk about is first I want to talk about the Great Pyramid, because everybody knows about the Great Pyramid being the pyramid that we kind of identify with as symbolic of all pyramids, I suppose you can say.
It is the Great Pyramid.
Right. They don't call it great for nothing. And I mean, it's really a marvel of, I mean, obviously it's one of the 7 wonders of the world, but what people don't understand is just how precise and that the blocks are cut and how much, how much it weighs and everything like that. I mean, it's a gigantic structure by any means, and I don't even know if we could duplicate it today.
There is no way to duplicate it today with our modern science. We would have to go to some extraordinary science, some other unknown aspects of our current science in order to recreate it faithfully. We don't have that capacity with what we currently have as far as what's considered modern science.
Right, and so obviously it's cut with laser-like precision, and some of the blocks weigh as much as 70 tons. And I mean, they're hoisted in the air, hundreds of feet in the air, and they're put together so that you can't even put a razor blade in. And it is obviously, if you look at the pyramid now, it's of course it's not going to be the same way it was when it was built, because all the casing stones were taken off and everything like that. But the important thing to remember about the pyramid is that from what I'm really going to be talking about is Christopher Dunn's thesis on it, as well as some other aspects to it, and that is that the pyramid was the different functions of it. And one of them is that it was a tuned oscillator machine. And another one that I'm going to be dealing with is the aspect of it actually focusing what's called tachyon energy, according to this book. It's really more like orgone energy.
Okay.
Into the pyramid. In other words, it's like a light focuser, if you will, and raising your frequency, raising your spiritual energy. So that's the aspect that I also am going to deal with, which is kind of the initiation type rituals that went into the pyramid. But to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, one important thing to remember about the pyramid is that it was built with a very clear understanding of the dimensions of the Earth. And that's going to be important later on when I deal with the Giza power plant. And let me just run through some of the information here that I'm dealing with. One is the weight of the Earth. All right, I'll just read this outlined here. Knowing the density of the Earth enables physicists to ascertain its weight to be approximately 6 billion trillion tons. That's the weight of the Earth, according to physicists. The Earth's weight and the weight of the Great Pyramid are found to be very closely related to one another, each other. By multiplying the weight of the pyramid by 1,000 trillion, you have the weight of the Earth. And so that's just one. And that lets you know that what I'm going to be talking about, it's related. Okay? So, and another thing is the sun's distance from the Earth. It seems that there's always been a struggle to solve the perplexing problem. Let's see if I can get here. Then as we gain our technical abilities, modern astronomy was able to give us a figure of 92,900,000 miles as the sun's mean distance from the Earth. Until our space programs, however, it was difficult to configure these figures. Scientists were then amazed to find that built into the Great Pyramid's base is the figure of 93,000 miles. And, there's a lot of other stuff in there, too.
So in other words, what you're saying is that the actual building itself, the way it's built, demonstrates or represents distances. And so built within the structure of the Great Pyramid, there's like a map, so to speak, in a sense. Or it represents structures or distances and measurements that we can equate to on a solar level that theoretically those folks at that time shouldn't have had access to.
Okay. Well,
Right.
the important thing to know about the pyramid is what I'm trying to say is that it's the dimensions of the pyramid are an integer of the planet, meaning that it's almost, even though it's not in the shape of a sphere, right? The dimensions, okay, of it are basically a ratio, if you will,
Like
of
a
the dimensions
harmonic
of the place.
representation.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And so the idea is that it's harmonically tuned to the Earth, and that's a very important thing to understand.
Okay, sounds good.
And so I'll just get into it as to why that is. According to Christopher Dunn in his book, Giza Power Plant, the pyramid was not a tomb, believe it or not. And I had known about that.
Well, let's
'cause I
touch
was
on
all-
that. I think that's important to mention that no corpse of any, like Tutankhamun or Ramses or any of the great pharaohs, none of their bodies were ever found in any of the great pyramids or the three pyramids at any point in time where they're ever found any bodies. They've always been historically found over 100 miles away in the Valley of the Kings, where they have proper burial places that are laid aside and put aside for them. And so that's a point to keep firmly in mind, that history cannot show that these were ever tombs for these pharaoh kings, or that they were even homages built to honor these great pharaoh leaders of ancient times. And so that's something to kind of put into perspective as far as our historical understanding of what's taking place as well.
Right. And, I know that that's, I guess, the mainstream view, at least according to guys like Zahi
But now he
Hawass.
acknowledges that there aren't any, weren't ever found any bodies. He equally acknowledges that. And Zahi Hawass is the antiquities director there at the Giza Plateau. He's like the main spokesperson. He's the
Right.
party line guy. And he's acknowledged it equally as well, that there's no evidence for that. So mainstream,
Right.
it's kind of color of law, kind of, so to speak, that these documentaries and these Discovery Channel shows keep kind of pursuing that angle, when in actuality that's really far removed from my belief and intuitive understanding, and obviously yours as well.
Right. And there's a lot of controversy surrounding, I guess, what I'm going to be dealing with. But at the same time, if you look at the pyramid, some of the other functions that you can discover is that Graham Hancock goes into this. I don't have the book with me, but he's written a book called Fingerprints of the Gods, and he talks about this. And he's done stuff on Discovery Channel and this and that. And that is that it's also astrotheologically aligned as well, meaning that astrology. Okay, it's aligned with the belt of Orion, obviously. And if you look at it, you have to go back 10,500 years before it lines up perfectly in the sky. And in addition, okay, other monuments as well. But I'm just going to be talking about the pyramids essentially, and in particular the Great Pyramid. And there's also evidence to support perhaps that it was actually a record of prophecy, if you will. So in other words, a lot of people, I mean, the pyramid, the Great Pyramid in particular, has been written about thousands and thousands of times. Many, many researchers have looked at it. And, you know, some of the earlier researchers have, you know, they documented everything. They measured everything to the millimeter almost. And they wrote it down. Now, obviously, they couldn't do it to the millimeter, but they did it to the inch, just about within, 1 or 2 inches. And people have looked at that evidence and they've said, okay, could this inch actually be equated with a year? And so they could go up into the Grand Gallery or the Queen's Chamber or the King's Chamber, and they would measure how long what the dimensions were, and then using what they call an Egyptian inch, which is a little bit more than a British inch, they were able to decipher, okay, this is how many years it's going to be before this and this hits. Now, I'm not going to be talking about that, but I think it's all very interesting. And what it does is that it tells you that there's a great deal of interest today in the pyramid, even, after all these researchers have written thousands of books on the subject, the interest is still there. In fact, I would venture to say it's even more there now than it's ever been.
Even though science has, progressed,
Right.
supposedly, allegedly, in that time, we have more questions now than we did back then, I would think.
Exactly. And so I'm going to get into the meat and potatoes of Dunn's research. And here's what he's talking about. The Great Pyramid is actually a big machine, or it was used as a machine. Now, that's not the only thing it's used for.
But when you say it was used as a machine, I'd like you to get into some of any kind of scientific evidence or
That's what
whatever
I'm gonna
you
be
can
dealing with here.
discover, or
So
whatever
let's-
you can lay out, rather, that points to any kind of mechanism or any kind of mechanical or anything that would lead to that, further bolster that it's a machine.
Okay, here's what you have to understand about the pyramid. Most of the pyramid is built out of limestone, okay? And obviously, I've already talked about how much a lot of the blocks weigh. And as precise as it is on the outside, it's even more precise on the inside. Now, what's the point in going through that kind of precision if you're just going to put a mummy in there? We've already gone through that. But what was it used for? Why would they build a monument, okay, that weighed 5.3, million tons and is over 400 feet tall and, and everything like that, if it was just going to be used as a burial tomb? I think we've canceled that out. So what was it used for? That's a good question. What's the functions of the pyramid? And this particular function deals with energy, and it deals with acoustical energy. And I'm just going to talk briefly about harmonics and acoustics so that the viewer has an understanding of it. Let me just say this first. Above the King's Chamber, okay, they discovered 5 chambers, okay, and in those chambers were something like 42 granite blocks, okay. Now, these granite blocks were extremely heavy, and people always wonder, well, why are these granite blocks here? What is the purpose of them? Well, to hear from, guys like I was telling you about, the mainstream Egyptians said, oh, well, the reason why they built those chambers above the King's Chamber was to relieve the pressure on it, okay? To relieve the pressure so that it wouldn't cave in. Well, I'm wondering, okay, well, if that's the case, then why wouldn't they do the same for the Queen's Chamber? I mean, obviously the Queen's Chamber has a lot, it's underneath the King's Chamber, and it has, it's about in the middle of the pyramid. It's got a ton more weight on top of it. You think that they didn't know how to relieve pressure on all? I mean, that, it doesn't make any sense. It's ridiculous.
Okay.
I mean, because you're looking at half the weight of the pyramid is coming down on the Queen's Chamber, and it's not collapsing. So what were those chambers for? And why were those blocks there? Well, they took a look at the blocks, right? These granite blocks. And they found out that they were cut on 3 sides, very, with laser-like precision. And on the top, it wasn't. on the top it was very rough, and it was chipped, and they even found holes bored into it, right? And well, why is that? Well, here's an interesting thing about granite. All right, this is rose quartz granite. Granite is made up of about 60% quartz. Okay, and what is quartz? Quartz is basically crystal. All right, and the cool thing is that if you look at it now, from a harmonic standpoint, now you're starting to get a little broader picture of what's actually going on here. The pyramid acts as a coupler, what's called an oscillating coupler, and what that means is that it means that anything that acts as a coupler basically draws energy out of a vibrating, a larger vibrating object. Well, the Earth, okay, is a giant dynamo, okay, essentially. And what that means is that inside the Earth you got, all the magma revolving around. And what they found out was that the actual crust of the Earth, right, is made up of 25% quartz around there. But if you look at silica, right, is actually, I was reading this thing in this book that I got, this Flower of Life series, and it basically talked about how silica actually attaches itself to other organisms and it grows. So in other words, it's actually conscious, if you will. And so it's one of the other things that, I'll deal with. But, we're carbon-based life forms, and silica is another base. But at the same time, what they discovered is that silica actually, if you look at it, how it deals with other minerals in the crust, it actually combines with them. So in other words, now you're looking at about 60%, 67% of silica based within the crust. Well, that makes it like a crystal ball, essentially. And when all the, when the magma underneath the surface revolves around it, what that does is that creates a magnetic field, okay? But it also creates a lot of seismic activity. Of course, everybody's familiar with earthquakes and everything like that. Well, would it be possible, I'm just going to pose this as a question, would it be possible to draw that seismic activity that's created by slippage of plates, okay? And would it be possible to draw that energy out of the earth and to basically use a pyramid as a tool to couple to the earth and then use that energy?
Okay, so getting back to the ideas of oscillation, which basically means rotation, and as higher oscillation is more rapid rotation, less oscillation is less rapid flux or rotation. And so the idea that you're saying essentially the pyramid could be used to be a lesser harmonic generator to draw from the Earth's greater frequency or greater harmonic discharge?
Well, the Earth, okay, was found out, okay, back in the 50s, 60s, around there, that there's an electrical discharge, all right, and what's known as the cavities between the Earth's crust and the higher atmosphere, and we're talking about the ionosphere, the troposphere, and the magnetosphere, okay? And that discharge creates a Hertzian wave, all right? And everybody that's familiar with radio is familiar with that. And that was determined to be about 7.83 hertz.
So that's the Schumann resonance?
Right, exactly. That's the Schumann resonance. So
that's the resonance of the planet.
So that's the resonance of the planet. So already you're having this electrical discharge come off of the planet, this electromagnetic frequency
it's
that's
a constant,
being pulsed.
Right, a constant
Right.
radiation.
Now, if you take that, okay, which is constant, and you add the seismic activity, okay, and it's been noted that there's as many as maybe 1,000 earthquakes every single day. Now, a lot of them you're not going to notice. A lot of them are very small. But because the Great Pyramid is harmonically in resonance with the Earth, okay, what that means is that it can act as an acoustic coupler to the Earth, which basically means it draws that energy out. So essentially what you're looking at is that if you got a pyramid, okay, and it's on a fault line, and there's an earthquake, right? What the pyramid does is that it draws that energy out there before it even reaches that point. So in other words, you got all the plate tectonics are moving around, and it's creating this seismic energy. Well, what the pyramid does is that the pyramid leaches that energy, and once it takes that energy, that seismic energy, because the pyramid is built as an acoustic device, meaning that it, and really, if you look at it, the dimensions of the pyramid, any acoustical engineer, there's been acoustical engineers that have looked at it, and they've said, okay, this is very, particularly the Grand Gallery and how the top of the ceiling is, has tiles that go in and everything like that. Well, what they determined is that you can be as far down as into the subterranean level of the pyramid, and sometimes you can hear what's going up in the king's chamber simply because it's that acoustic.
Okay, so how does all this tie into
I'm getting to that.
history, mankind, or anything like that?
Well, let me go through the science, sir, because I don't think I explained it well enough.
Okay, no problem.
And I've been jumping around, and I apologize. But anyway, that's how my mind works sometimes. Getting back to what I was telling you about the granite, okay? Now it makes perfect sense as to why the top part, or why the number one, they used granite, and number two, why it was above the king's chamber, and number three, why it was rough on top and everything like that. Because if you look at the granite, it's like strings on a guitar, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can see how if the pyramid acts as a coupler of this acoustic seismic energy that's coming off the planet, okay, all the time, then and it basically it goes all the way up to the king's chamber, and above there you have these granite blocks, which are basically tuned to the Earth's frequency, all right, and I just showed you that the Earth has a resonant frequency, and now you can understand how the pyramid basically uses that acoustical energy, right, and transduces it into electricity. And an interesting story on that is there was a scientist back in the late 1800s. Trying to remember his name. That slipped my mind, but I'll look it up if you want to know. And he was standing on top of the pyramid, right? And he felt like there was a frequency. It was like kind of making him agitated. And he wasn't quite sure what it was, and he pointed his finger up in the air, and he felt it, kind of prickly sensation. And he had a bottle with him that he was drinking wine, and it suddenly, he felt electricity coming from it. And so what he did is he took, he wrapped a bottle. He said, okay, well, this is really interesting. I don't know what the hell's going on here, but I want to do some experiments. And he took a bottle, right, and he wrapped it in a wet newspaper, right, and he created what's called a Leyden jar. And he raised his hand, above him, high above himself, and he stood right in the center of the pyramid, and he saw sparks shooting off of it. And he was like, this is amazing. And of course, the guys that were with him, these Egyptian guys that were with him, were freaking out. And one of them actually was like, trying to take stuff away from one of his assistants, and he pointed it at him, and he shocked the hell out of him. And the guy just like, fell back and, ran down the pyramid. Well, what that tells you is that that's exactly one of the functions of the pyramid, is that it could essentially, and obviously, Christopher Dunn makes the case, and I've tried to make the case here, is that they've used acoustic energy or seismic energy, which is basically vibration. And what they do is they transduce it through a crystal and create an electricity. And the reason why they can do that is because if you compress crystal together, right, and you rub it together, then, or with any kind of, obviously, seismic energy is gonna do that. It's gonna compress it, and then what you do is you create what they call a piezoelectric effect. And what that does is that because of that compression, because the crystals are rubbing together, that creates electricity. Now this is provable, and he's got a bunch of pictures in here that I could show you, but I don't think I will. None of them are really all that great, but anyway, the idea is well, there's a lot of harmonic stuff in here and everything like that, but that's what, essentially that what he claims the pyramid was able to do. Now, as a power plant, obviously, you're looking at endless free energy that they could have used for anything that they so chose. You know, and and it wasn't just that. If you look at the pyramid, and then start, it's particularly the mystery school religions, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Now you're dealing with subject matters where, okay, now you're starting to see other functions that it could possibly be for. And so, in addition to the power plant idea, alchemy, astrology, modern day medicine, all of that, all originated from the pyramid, from these pyramid mystery schools, if you will. And so, we can definitely deal with that. And that what that's dealing with is that that within the pyramid, particularly the king's chamber, is where they would initiate what they call neophytes, or the new. They would initiate them into the mysteries. And how they did that, I believe that they used the acoustical effects of the pyramid to do that. But in addition to that, I mean, obviously there was a lot of rituals that went on in the pyramid, and we can definitely talk about that if you want to. So.
Okay, so okay. Let's try to tie in more so your ideas about from the scientific perspective of how this might have been some kind of a power deriving or kind of a cumulative energy organism or device, whatever term you want to use, and that furthermore into or fill out more so how that relates to how humans might have made use of it. Also, perhaps we can get into the idea that other cultures as well across the globe used pyramids, built pyramids,
Right.
had that as a key component to their,
Yeah,
their society and their culture.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this knowledge, I mean, really, if you look at the pyramids, right, it's not just Giza. When people think of the pyramids, they think of Egypt, but you got pyramids on 5 other continents. You got pyramids in South America, obviously, Mexico. You're looking at, you got the Mayans, the Aztecs, Peruvians. You got pyramids in China. They discovered pyramids in the jungles of China and southern China. They at first they didn't even think they were. They're relatively recently discovered, actually. You got pyramids everywhere you could think of, and so the knowledge was there in ancient times. And I believe, personally, my humble belief is that it was a technology that the ancients knew about that proliferated out of Atlantis, if you will, and it just spread. And it went to all these other continents, and they created pyramids. Now, just because all the pyramids don't look alike doesn't mean that they're not all pyramids. And the different shapes and everything like that, basically what that's telling you is that different pyramids serve different functions. But the fact remains that if there wasn't any connection, okay, between one and the other, how can you explain a similar monument popping up halfway across the world from one place to the other? I mean, it doesn't make any sense unless you see it coming from a common source. So.
Also, I would point out that all the pyramids that have been on record have some kind of astrological or astronomical implications as far as how they're lined up in relation to star systems. And
Right.
like you were saying earlier, the Great Pyramid of Giza lines up with Sirius, the top of the point of the pyramid lines up
one
with
of the
Sirius.
shafts, one of the northern shafts points to Sirius, and this is at a specific time. Now, I can really get into some really esoteric stuff if you want to, as far as the pyramids go, because one of the things that I heard, at least this one researcher is doing, is that he was discovering what they called vortex energy within the pyramid. And what he discovered is that if you go in the king's chamber, it looked as if the walls had been sunken in somewhat, and he was wondering what caused that. I mean, if now scientists would tell you, oh well, that was just they had some earthquakes, and it broke, and it brought whatever. But it's only in the king's chamber that is. And so he started doing experiments, and this is a man by the name of Joe Parr. Okay, now Joe's been at it for a long time. He's a physicist, and he's been into pyramid research for a while. And what he did is that he started doing experiments with these pyramids. And what he would do is he would put a model pyramid, and a centrifuge, and he would spin magnets around it to try to generate much more of an electromagnetic charge to it. And that's one of the things I'm going to be dealing with here is the electromagnetic nature of pyramids. But what he did is that he was trying to charge the pyramid. He's trying to create this vortex energy in the pyramid. And what he found out was is that if he put a device in there, such as a radio or whatever that was broadcasting the signal, that within the pyramid he could create a bubble, if you will, a force field. And it was like it was a weakened signal. In other words, it wouldn't get out as much, because of this force field. And he could basically dampen the signal from reaching it. And also radioactivity. You could put radioactive materials in there, and it would also create a force field around it. Well, what he found out was is that on the one day where the Earth is aligned completely, this pyramid that he has, he was aligned completely with the star constellation of Sirius, it completely closed off, which meant nothing got outside. And what it did is it shrunk in. And so, that's really interesting research, I think, because it shows, okay, maybe that's what happened. Now, he believes that it could be used as a time machine because of that effect, because of the effect of this vortex energy that basically creates, a force field, like a bubble, if you will. But the important thing to know is that if the pyramids were built like that, could they have been been used for something like that as a stargate, if you will? And I think there's the definite possibility they could have been. And so, and of course, a lot of people think that the pyramids were built by the Syrians to begin with. So it definitely ties
Syrians in the sense of people from Sirius, the star Sirius, in other words.
Right.
Correct? Okay, well, that's,
Well, in other words, according to the Pyramid Energy book, they claim, and for all I know, they're right, that the pyramids were actually built by Hermes. In other words, he's the one that had the design for it. He's not necessarily the one that moved the stone, but he's the one that actually designed it. And Hermes, of course, is later on he was called Thoth and this and that. And of course, there's like Egyptian hieroglyphs of Thoth. And he was also the founder of Hermetics. If you want to get into that, that's basically somewhat of like a metaphysical philosophy that Jeff talks about a lot. And but the principles still apply, and of course they apply everywhere, regardless of where they are. So universal principles, if you will, so of Hermetics. But I'm sure Jeff's talked about that long enough. So now the other thing I want to deal with is the concept of the pyramid. In other words, like people ask, why the shape? What's the purpose of that? In other words, why does it have to take on a pyramid shape? And is there a way that I can benefit from this knowledge of the pyramid? Because if you can't make it practical, then of what good is it, right? Now, obviously, the Giza power plant does, I think, make it practical, at least in somewhat, because if we could duplicate that, we could have a free energy source. So, that ain't all bad. Particularly when you're fighting wars over oil and this and that. So, certainly, free energy device, good idea. But in addition to that, how do you make it practical on a smaller scale? To where if you were actually build a model pyramid for yourself, what kinds of experiences could you have? And that's what this book, Pyramid Energy, basically deals with. And it's basically a husband and a wife who had a son who...
Was his name Horace? Just kidding.
Yeah. Well, his name's John, basically. That's their son. And their son, he was having a hard time adjusting to, the plan because he was like what they might call bipolar, and he's somewhat aloof.
Mm-hmm.
And what they discovered is that he was resonating too much in the spiritual realm and not much on the earth. So they wanted to ground him.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they did is they had a clairvoyant, design a pyramid for him. And so he did. And they used it basically just for their son, for medical purposes. And what they discovered is that the pyramid could balance his energies out so that he could ground himself more into the physical while at the same time maintaining the spiritual side. And So it worked for them, obviously.
And let me quickly, how do they decide on the dimensions and things of that nature for that particular exercise? To
Well,
implement it?
from what I read, they basically what they did is that they modeled it on the Great Pyramid,
Okay.
for one thing.
So you just scaled it to the Great Pyramid.
So it was done to scale, and the way that you can do it to scale the model of the pyramid is that for the one thing, the base of the pyramid, the square, is exactly equal for the most part to the circumference of the circle, and so that's where you get the circle and the square, and there's a lot of people that have talked about that relationship when it comes to sacred geometry as basically being the two really fundamental shapes that you have to understand, or the cube or the pyramid, the cube or the sphere. So that's one thing, and of course, the Great Pyramid is angled at about 51 degrees, like 51, and so they did that. And this is where the Oregon accumulator comes into play. What they did is that they created essentially a condenser, okay, or in electrical terms you could call it a capacitor, an electrical capacitor. And the way that they actually,
Something that stores energy, in other words.
right, it would actually store energy. Now you have to have it covered if you're going to do that.
Contained.
Okay, because that's what it's containing this. But what they did is that they were able to contain what they call tachyon energy, but could just as easily be called orgone energy or
Right.
prana or
Chi.
life force energy, right? That was the function of this pyramid.
Okay.
And essentially what it did is that it was able to harness it. And of course they go into detail as far as like the different levels of tachyon energy basically being physical, mental, and spiritual. And of course where you are in the pyramid depends on what level you're at, supposedly. But essentially what the pyramid was able to do, and they make this case, is that they say that the pyramid is actually a focuser of subatomic light. Okay, and the subatomic light is the same thing I've been talking about. It's like ether, okay? It's subtle energy, if you will. But it focuses it in the pyramid, and it balances your energy out using vortex
Like rotating fields. in
right,
other words.
of rotating fields of this light, essentially,
Okay.
antimatter, matter. And so that's what they were using it for, and I thought that was really cool because
Okay, well, let's expand a bit more. Were they able to expand that science, that application to other applications? Were they able to use it for other healing of other or treatment of other diseases,
Absolutely.
disorders? Okay.
absolutely,
Right.
I mean,
And did they have to attune or change the dimensions or change anything about the particular pyramid they were using on a case-by-case basis? Is it?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Different pyramids, okay, depending upon the shape and the angle of its incline, are going to have different effects. And one of an interesting thing I want to talk to you about, and I'm glad you brought that up, is there's been some amazing research being done on pyramids, even recently.
Mhm.
And actually, there was Russian scientists, okay, about a dozen Russian scientists back in the 80s up until about the early 90s, were doing research on the pyramids. And what they did is they built pyramids out of plexiglass, and they built 17 of them, and they spaced them out in like 8 different places. And one of them, and now these weren't just scientists from a local university. These were the heavyweights that were working at the Russian Academy of Sciences. Okay. And in other words, they before they did this, they were one of the main branches. This university, Ukraine University, were actually they were the ones developing military technology for the Russian government. So we're talking about some really heavyweights in science here are dealing with this. And so they created these pyramids out of plexiglass, and really big pyramids too. One of them was 140 feet tall, but it was steeper. It was steeper. Just about like that. So it wasn't in the same dimensions as the Great Pyramid, but they started doing research, and what they discovered was all kinds of great stuff. And one thing is that it increased your immunity. And so what they did is they tested lab rats. They would put lab rats in there. They would test their blood before they put them in there. And then they would put them in there. And they did it controlled. Everything is controlled, so they had it, completely so that it was like a double-blind type of thing. And what they discovered is that when the lab rats were inside of the pyramid, they had increased leukocyte levels, which basically are cancer-fighting agents within the body. In other words, increased immunity. And they also found out that it would kill bacteria, viruses, if you ever placed in the pyramid. They would put distilled water in the pyramid and give it to babies. And if the babies had a problem, in other words, if there was basically a lot of babies are born with all kinds of nutritional disorders, it would basically help those babies out so that, okay, now they didn't have it so much. It would help them out. And all kinds of good stuff. I mean, it's like, I can go into it on and on. Of course, everybody's heard of the razor blade effect.
Right, the pyramid power from the 70s.
Right, if you put a razor blade under a pyramid, it supposedly maintains its sharpness. And this was actually discovered by a guy, and he patented, what they called like a ferro razor. I mean, and he tried to get a patent for it, but the patent office wouldn't, take him up on it.
I remember that in the 70s actually pretty well. That was going on.
Right, and so, yeah.
But it gets back to the idea that there's frequency generated and that you can use the frequency to focus the frequency to get certain work done.
Right,
it's
like it's a focusing of this life force energy,
things.
this cosmic energy that will raise your vibration.
Okay,
and when you raise your vibration, and that's important because, I mean, obviously anybody that's familiar with Royal Raymond Rife and his technology, that's what he used.
Well, get into that a bit.
Well, Rife basically made a machine that
he made two devices.
Right, but the main thing that I'm talking about is the device that would basically, what it would do is that you would hold on to like these two tubes, essentially, and you put your feet on feet plants, and you could send a frequency through it, like a Hertzian frequency. And what he discovered is that he was able to kill viruses with that. So in other words, he was able to cure just about any kind of disease you can think of just by resonating with whatever it was that he was trying to destroy.
The opposite to it. You weren't resonating with it, you were resonating counter to it. But
right. Well, or essentially, here's a better way to understand it. Let's say that you got colon cancer, right? Well, let's say you want to get your colon back in, proper conditioning. Well, find the resonant frequency of whatever your colon is, healthy, and then pump that frequency through it, and then, hey, cancer's gone. Simply because what you're doing is that you're basically sending a frequency in there that is resonating at what it should be. In other words,
actually, I think it's my understanding is that they send a signal that's opposite to whatever is anti-health.
That could be a way too. That's if you're trying to like.
I think that's the way that it works. Well, but nonetheless, let's get back to the idea that the microscope is the other aspect of the device, which allows to see, first of all, at the virus level. And then once you can identify the virus, then you can identify its resultant frequencies, and you can counter a frequency, send a frequency that would obliterate, kind of like the matter antimatter concept, that it's going to be the antithesis of that frequency, so it's going to obliterate it or negate it. But nonetheless, the idea of power generation and vibration is a key term that we keep coming back to, and I think that's applicable all the way around. Did you want to throw any other ideas about the pyramids particularly?
Whatever you want to talk about, I mean, even if you want to talk about how the blocks were moved, because a lot of people ask that.
That's good. Let's go there.
Obviously, these blocks are not going to be.
Well, okay. First of all, this really heavy multi-ton blocks, the angles at which they were raised, we don't have anything that can recreate that. First of all, and so it really begs the question, how exactly did they levitate, or whatever means that they had at their disposal? How did they accomplish lifting these large blocks and again, with such precision, inserting them at these high elevations within the context of this greater unfolding structure? And that takes much precision.
I know. I mean, come on. We're talking about 70-ton type blocks.
And also another thing, as far as the age of the pyramid, certainly some say it could be as old as 10,500 years old. Some even ascribe older ages to it, closer to the realm of 50,000 years. So I think conservatively it's what, 5,000 years old or something like that? That's the mainstream idea about it.
Yeah, something like that, 5,000, 4,000 years. They basically think that it was built for Khufu. So
Okay, so
You know,
whenever
they
his
had all the
reign
Khufus
was,
to him,
roughly
right.
speaking. Okay.
Which, wasn't that long ago.
Right, so you think that we'd have some kind of evidence more so. Matter of fact, there's another thing I want to bring up. They find accommodations where it looks as if people were a lot of workers amassed at the base of the pyramids, but they don't find the mass graves that you would think they would be finding right there in that same area. You would think that they would have exhausted many lives, many generations, as a matter of fact, of workers, is what they allege in the mainstream ideas. So where are all the graves for all these multitudes of workers that allegedly toiled, enslaved, and gave their lives, and again, generations of lives to build this
Well, let's,
great structure?
I think we got to take some calls. I mean, if the
Okay,
callers are
yeah,
interested
sure.
in this,
Let's
I'll
go
deal
ahead.
with it.
Sure.
Let's
Hello,
see
caller,
what
you're on the air.
Hello?
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good.
Do you have a question or comment?
Oh, yeah, pyramids and all?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do you mean by pyramid energy?
How much of the previous few minutes of the show have you seen?
Oh, past 2 minutes.
Okay,
Wow.
let's go with that.
You might want to start a
yeah,
little
it's
earlier.
helpful to catch the show from the beginning because we lay out the whole idea, and then we try to take calls from folks that have been viewing so that they can have specific questions in relation to what we've been discussing. Pyramid energy relates to vibration. Everything has a harmonic or vibration. All living things, even inorganic things, have a vibration that you can attune to and check. And so certain devices we are alleging were built to enhance or focus this vibration energy. And it could also be used for the benefit of or the evolutionary process to help unfold our evolutionary vibrational qualities. Energy is a vibrational.
Just say electromagnetic accumulator for that dummy. Okay, next.
Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hey, none of this really seems very esoteric at all to me. Kind
Okay.
of seems like a lot of stuff that this Shag guy has read out of books and stuff that he just kind of repeats back, but doesn't really have a full understanding. And that's
Do you have a
point.
specific question that you care to ask so he can, from his own understanding, perhaps elucidate a bit and demonstrate that maybe he knows what he's talking about at least a little bit?
Yeah, I want to know exactly what this energy is. I have watched about the last half hour or so.
When you say what the energy is, how is it accumulated, or what is the quality of the energy? What is the origin? What is your specific
What
question?
medium is it conducted by?
Okay, that's a good one. That's a helpful question. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
What medium?
Mm-hmm. How would they? If they're generating, this is a power generating structure. If it's the Giza power plant, okay, obviously the pyramid would be the medium, I suppose. But within the medium of the Great Pyramid itself proper, what is your understanding?
Well, it depends on whether or not number one, it depends on whether or not you're talking about like a model pyramid that you would use individually, or whether or not you're talking about the acoustical aspects of the pyramid that I talked about with the Giza pyramid, or in other words, there's different aspects of energy involved here. In other words, I don't know exactly, the pyramid is like, it's not just one energy or another, there's multiple aspects to it.
But as far as, I think I see more, let me try to help elaborate a bit more. If you're talking about the home version that those folks in this book built, then the medium was to be more along the lines of an orgone or chi accumulator. So there may not have been any kind of, again, a mechanical means within this. It may have just been an empty four-sided object, right?
Well, for them, okay, and for anybody else that builds like a home pyramid, if you will, that is essentially a capacitor, which is what they did. Essentially, what the pyramid does is that it focuses light inside, and basically it creates it creates what you might call subatomic. Okay, you're looking at subatomic particles.
I think we've covered that, but we're not really getting to the meat and potatoes of the means by which it does this, and what your understanding might be of how exactly a four-sided object can do this. What is the mechanical, whatever? What is the working that's allowing that to take place? I think that's more so the question at hand.
Well,
or do we even understand that enough to really offer an answer?
There's not. See, if it's just like a model pyramid, there is no mechanical device per se.
So as far as you know, these folks had an empty four-sided.
But no, I mean, what they did is they created an electrical capacitor out of a pyramid, and of course and what that did is that refocused this subtle energy inside the pyramid, or what they call electromagnetic or tachyon energy, and what that was allowed to do is that what that would do is that would essentially raise your vibratory frequency up into a more spiritual level, to where you could actually use the pyramid as a transmitter or a receiver, because that's essentially what I'm talking about when I talk about the pyramid. The pyramid is like a giant antenna for this, and the shape of it to itself acts as that antenna. In other words, because that's essentially what I'm dealing with. I probably didn't explain it well enough to the caller, but essentially, if you look at consciousness, right, because that's what we're basically dealing with at the bottom level here, is that the pyramid actually creates what you might call a higher state of consciousness by focusing this consciousness into a shape whereby it can actually take root within the subtle body. So when I talk about like the pyramid, and I talk about the acoustical aspects, that's just from a scientific point of view. But if you want to look at consciousness, okay, and you want to talk about the expansions of consciousness, then I can deal with that too. Because people have taken pictures while inside the pyramid, and what they call, I don't know if you've ever heard of Carillion photography, but essentially it's that same type of energy, okay? If you've ever had a Carillion a photograph taken, what it does is it takes a picture of her aura, okay, which is like your light body. It's like, it's etheric energy. And what the pyramid does is that it expands that. It can either expand it out, or it can basically bring it down to the molecular level. In other words, it can you can either use it as a transmitter, or you can use it as a receiver.
Focusing.
Right, focusing. In other words, you focus it. You focus it on your third eye. If you want to open up your higher dimensional.
Yeah, I don't know how much we're going to get into maybe the mechanical nature of any of these devices necessarily, but more so the applicable.
The caller was like, "Well, what is it? What is it?" And all these callers, "What is it?" Well, I tried to explain it.
That's a question I have as well too, in all honesty. But let's go on to another caller. Hello, caller on the air.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
All right. Along the line you were just thinking, I just kind of think it might be curious to consider what it would be like to put a pyramid into an electrical circuit and see how it affects the circuitry.
That's not a bad thing to consider, and it's apparently, throughout time, because the pyramids have been with us a long time, many people have experimented in various ways with either the tetrahedron, the four-sided solid, or other means to try to derive something, experiment with it different ways, and looking at it in the vibrational means.
This might give the caller an interesting idea of what I'm talking about, and if I can just go to this
You want to show the diagram real quick?
Right. Okay. I don't know if you can see that.
We'll explain the diagram.
Okay, this diagram is the way that they describe that this tachyon energy moves, which is basically an electron movement, okay? And of course, I don't want to go too far into the physics of it, but that's the way that they describe that it moves around the atom, right? This right here, this diagram essentially. But here's what's interesting right here. This right here, okay, if you can see it, you can kind of see some people dancing, right? Well, this is what they're doing. This particular paragraph talks about the Hopi Indians, right? Because the way that they describe what comes off of the top of the pyramid, if you will, is they say that it's a standing columnar wave, right? And if you take a picture of it, it looks a lot like a double helix, essentially. And that's one function of it, at least, is that as this transmitter, if you will, this energy. Well, what's interesting is that from the Hopis did a rain dance, okay, like a lot of other Indians would, and they would basically mimic that same pattern that they described in the book as actually the way that this tachyon energy moves, which basically tachyon energy stands. To understand it, it's basically energy tacked on, if you will. So they describe it as somewhat like the glue of the universe, essentially like ether energy, which is like this subtle energy force, right? Well, when they danced around the same pattern, okay, they could create rain, because once again they're creating this standing columnar wave, right?
They're creating a harmonic, in other words.
Right, and so their thoughts, right? Because the pyramid
and the
is
motion. I'm sure
right.
the rhythm and
right,
the motion.
exactly. Plus that takes into account because the pyramid is actually also a transmitter, can be used as a transmitter. Then you can use it to carry those thoughts, or any kind of emotion. So in other words, whatever you bring in, that's what you're going to amplify. The pyramid amplifies it.
Okay.
So if if you want
Again,
to
the idea of
expand
focus.
love and compassion, that's what it's going to amplify. Okay. So I just thought I'd show that. Not that it's going to clear anything up.
Well, no, but I mean, I think that does help somewhat. We're understanding the spiral or the cyclical nature of the energy is helpful, I think, at some level, because
Right.
it
And they
it
go into
demonstrates,
that.
again, vibration, wave, frequency, ideas of sound, and things of that nature that tie back to how matter and spirit interact and intertwine. And again, different vibrational levels are going to result in different forms. And so obviously the form, the tetrahedron, the four-sided pyramid, has implications for our humanity. These pyramids have been around for a long time. They're,
I'll correct you. The tetrahedron is a three-sided pyramid.
oh, sorry, you're right. Three-sided. Well,
Okay,
three-sided, but four including the base, yes?
Well, the three-sided pyramid is basically
Three-sided plus a base. Yeah.
Oh,
that's
yeah, if you
four.
want to count that.
Well, you have to,
Okay.
because considering Platonic solids, that's four-sided, three sides plus a base.
But that's just what they call it.
But nonetheless, the
Tetrahedron.
idea of Plato, the Platonic solids, Pythagoras, all of the great philosophers and mathematicians have
Right. and
embodied that idea in their philosophy at some level. As you're saying, the circle and the square, that ties back to masonry and the symbolism of masonry. And so
And
there
they-
are a
and
lot
they-
of implications for, again,
And
the
these
harmony
guys were
frequency.
considered initiated into this, okay? Guys like Pythagoras and Plato and even Jesus, okay, in the so-called lost years was considered to have been an initiate, and that's so it was like you had the Magi, right, the three wise men that were actually basically, Hermeticists, if you will, that had been initiated into these pyramid mystery schools. So, it all relates back. I don't know if you'd be able to take us some phone calls.
Yeah,
but-
sure, I'm grabbing it. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hey, you see that guy, Shag?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go ahead and grab him.
Wait, what do you have to say?
I don't know. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
FB will get you.
FBU guy called in. I was waiting for that idiot.
So you feel like you're a real guest now?
Yeah, I feel like I've made it.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Made
good.
man now that
Have another-
FBU called.
Okay. Hello, caller, you're on the air. Hello, caller.
Hello.
Hi, do you have a question or comment? Okay.
I was hoping some of my friends would call because I told them all about it, but no.
We're getting calls. It's just I don't know if we're getting the quality of calls that I normally would like.
I don't get the
but,
same caliber Alex Jones pulls, do you? No, I'm just kidding.
basically, I don't know, maybe a Memorial holiday or something like that. It's got some
Yeah.
folks out of town. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and wrap up here. We have less than a minute, so I want to go ahead and just tie in any last comments together that you care to offer.
Okay. The last comment that I want to make is that I believe strongly, and the evidence I believe backs it up, that the pyramid is a tool for transformation of consciousness. And that's the most important thing for each individual to remember if, in fact, he wants to go ahead and get whatever blueprints he needs to actually build one on his own. And then you can, test it out for yourself, and basically transform your consciousness if need be.
If need
And-
be.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks a lot, Shag, for coming on. I do appreciate that. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to view. I want to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. Thanks, Austin.